Today we will be discussing the importance of stress management. In order to understand stress, we need to get to know what stress actually means. So join me so that we can explore that topic together. So, are we ready to talk about stress? So when you look at stress, it's very important to realize that it is a very physical thing as well as a mental thing. The definition is very difficult to really come to terms with because it's a complex subject and people just use the word stress very casually in our day-to-day society, right? So one way that you can understand stress a little bit better is that it is something like tension. It's tension in the body, right? Which is reflected in the physical ways that we feel the blood pressure increasing. Sometimes we get headaches. Sometimes we might break into a sweat. So very often we understand that we are feeling stressed when we are under some level of tension. It's important to clarify that stress is actually connected to various diseases, right? Including depression, anxiety, and actually physical diseases like diabetes and cancer. So a lot of the research today is connected with stress. I like to think of stress as something you can understand through the word disease. Dis-ease, right? Disease comes from dis-ease, which means when your body is not at ease, you tend to get sick. So let's get to know stress a bit better, right? Very simply, when you think about stress, you have to understand that there is some tension within the body and within the mind. Stress is a normal part of life, right? We can be stressed no matter where we are, no matter who we are. And it's important to understand that because life is always uncertain, we will go through stress from time to time. But it's also important to understand that there are variations of stress. There is good stress when we become productive, that is the stress that pushes us forward. There is bad stress, which is known as chronic stress, right? Which makes us feel sick, it makes us get a panic attack, it makes us feel as if we have no self-control, and everything seems wrong at that time. So it's important to make a distinction about the good stress and the bad stress. To understand how important stress is, some scientific research has suggested that all diseases of the body as well as the mind have some connection to stress. Stress is definitely something that is not normal when it comes to your body and your mind, because that's why you react to it in such a negative way. But in saying that, stress is something that is always going to happen because life is unpredictable. So it's important not to get too carried away about stress. The first thing you need to understand is that this is something that you can control if you understand it and understand little tips how to manage it. So let's look at the physiology of stress. That is basically how does stress look when it comes to the mind and the brain and the hormonal imbalances. So most of you would have heard of the fight or flight response. The fight or flight response is the most basic human response. Back in the day when our ancestors were in the jungle and there were always threats like mountain lions and poisonous snakes, famines, our fear response would react. We'd have to figure out whether to fight or whether to flight or even freeze. Right? So fight is basically attacking whatever it is that is threatening us or running away from it to avoid any kind of physical harm. And also the kind of freezing where we kind of stand there as something happens so that we don't get affected by it. We sometimes call it playing dead. So when you kind of have that approach, which is within your body, right, it is the stress response. So very simply, stress is very closely related to something that we all are very familiar with, which is fear. What makes us scared of something could also be somewhat of a stress response. It is a survival mechanism, which means we need to be afraid sometimes, so in order to protect ourselves. So when you look at the hormones such as cortisol and adrenaline, those are the hormones that are pumping within your brain when you are in the stress response or fight or flight response. So understanding this physiology will help you understand how to manage it better. So when we look at a brain scan, so if we take a look at this, the MRI, right? You can understand that, this is something that does not have much of activity going on, right? That's the image. Whereas this image has a very significant area which has been activated. So for those of you who are not familiar, this is what a brain on post-traumatic stress disorder looks like. And this is an image where you're not really going through that much of stress. You're pretty calm, pretty normal. Everything's just going the way it's supposed to go. So as you can see from this image, there's a lot of activity happening, and your brain lights up when you are under stress. This is why so many things seem out of our control when we are under stress, because the brain literally gets hijacked by the stress response. So when we look at stress, I spoke a little bit about how there could be good stress and bad stress. So the good stress, the technical term is eustress. That's EUSTRESS. This is the stress which we need to learn to channel, right? How do we channel eustress? This stress comes when we are doing a task which we need to clarify, like a deadline, right? So we all need to perform at our jobs. We all need to manage our relationships, our families. So it's important that there's a little bit of pressure, because if we don't get pressured at all, the world would basically be dysfunctional. So remember how I spoke about there being good stress and bad stress? Well, it's important to understand that the good stress or positive stress is referred to as eustress. That is EUSTRESS. So obviously we are better off if we used eustress a bit more often. This takes skill and practice, because it's not normal for us to be able to channel stress automatically, right? So it's important to realize that whenever we are stressed out, we try and manage that stress in order to receive outcomes and achieve certain targets. We all have relationships that we need to manage, we have families, we have jobs we need to perform at. So stress is important to a certain extent, because if we did not feel a little bit of pressure, then it would be very, very hard to perform in anything in life. So the world would be very dysfunctional without a little bit of stress. So that is the eustress. It's important to understand that if we can apply eustress more often, our lives would be more productive and more fulfilling. Then we can discuss negative stress. Negative stress is the kind of stress that we all talk about, right? Which is chronic stress. This is the prolonged stress. This stress manifests itself in high blood pressure, panic attacks, the feeling of hopelessness and loss of control. That is the negative stress, right? So it can be prolonged. We are not saying that stress is bad, it's just that when it is prolonged over a long period of time, it can become bad for your health. And that's why it can be related to all kinds of diseases, including diabetes, hypertension, and various cancers as well. So keep in mind the two distinctions of good stress and bad stress. Now I will share with you a very simplistic model in order to understand stress and manage it effectively. Very simply, think of it as ABC. A stands for awareness. Awareness is understanding what is making you stressed. When we understand something, that is much, much more we become much more capable of managing it, right? So whenever we are stressed about something, it's important to be aware that at that point, yes, I am stressed. The second aspect is balance. That is B, right? Now I will share with you a very simplistic model called the ABC model. This is going to help you frame stress and manage it more effectively in a simple way. So, in the ABC model, A stands for awareness. Awareness is basically becoming aware that you are stressed. So, whenever you are going through that moment of fear, where the fear response has kicked in, bring attention to the fact that you are stressed about this. Then you can start questioning yourself as to why you are stressed about this particular thing. Once we understand and become more aware of what is making us stress, it's that much easier to let go of the stress. The B in the ABC model stands for balance. Balance is very, very necessary. As human beings, we need to be balanced, right? Our bodies are always in a state of homeostasis. That's the ideal state. So how do we become back into the homeostasis? Stress kind of disrupts that, right? So when we become disrupted in homeostasis, we need to bring back the attention to balance. How do you become balanced? Very simply, there are many ways. One great way of doing it is through deep breathing. Breathing is something that I will discuss in a more prolonged way in another session. But for now, just remember deep inhalation and deep exhalation. Very simply. This will help you ground yourself. The C in the ABC model stands for control. We all know that we like control in our lives, but life is not always under our control. In fact, most of the time life is not under our control. But one way we can regain some power is understanding and figuring out what is it that makes us afraid and worried about something. So to get in control, we need to understand psychological inquiry, that is understanding and asking questions about whatever is stressing us, figuring out who to talk to, and regaining that sense of balance through various exercises like breathing, healthy diet, working out, talking to a friend. That way you feel that you are more in control of your life. So prioritize things. Figure out ways to balance the ABC model, and that way your stress will that much be more manageable. Hopefully you got a better understanding of what stress is about, so that when you participate in day-to-day activities, you can manage it that much better. Hopefully next time we will be exploring a little bit more on how we can apply certain methodologies in managing stress more effectively.